Wendy, have you seen the video on YouTube of Lionel Sanders about 2 weeks ago? He says, why I train indoors. Be interested in your perspective. And both Wendy and I have watched this video, and I've got some good takeaways. What's your perspective on Lionel Sanders' focus on training indoors now?
Well, I think, like the way he starts it is he talks about he lives in Canada. So 6 months out of the year, most Canadian triathletes do train indoors due to weather. He explains how he fell on ice one time, and when conditions are that bad, it's not worth the risk of possible injury to have to train in ice and cold and just not great conditions. So that makes sense to me to train indoors. But then he kind of went on to say how he trains indoors, all year round, even in nice summer or spring-like days when it's, like 70 degrees and sunny and not humid, blah, blah, blah. And he still trains indoors because it's a controlled environment. And that is where I say that's one reason that I like to train outdoors, because I race outdoors in an uncontrolled environment. And so to always train indoors in a controlled environment, in my mind, does not necessarily equate to the elements that you're going to face outside, such as varying terrain and wind, both directions, and rain and anything else you're going to encounter on race day. Also, one reason I like to train is to be outside. So one of my whys of being a multi-sport athlete and trail runner is the joy of being outside and not inside. The difference is he's a professional, I'm an amateur. That kind of changes things, from that perspective as well.
You make a good argument on going outside and dealing with the unpredictability of the conditions and how those will be very similar to a real race situation where you've got weather, you've got terrain, you've got wind, you've got other athletes. I like his consistency point of view on you're able to control the data and your results, or at least you have a little more control over them on how you approach your workout. But also the point you said, he's a professional. This is his job versus the amateurs who have different motivations and different expectations for results. He needs to know what he can do in an ideal situation and then adapt to real life situations. There really is no substitute for going outside, especially when on the bike. Running, you can go outside and you can kind of find a flat terrain. You're still dealing with gravity, maybe some light breeze and whatever little variations in the terrain. But I think that would probably be the easiest to simulate indoors and outdoors versus cycling, which you cannot do the outdoors and make it the same indoors unless you had some sort of, a Zwift or some sort of comp trainer or whatever it is that would change the terrain for you, at least the power elements of it for wattage.
Right. So it's going to the bike. If you're someone who really likes to hold that power, that small power zone of, let's just say 150 to 155 watts for 10 minutes, that's going to be difficult to do outside. Even if you're on a flat terrain, it's still difficult because you have the wind. Even a flat terrain has little bumps in the road. And so your wattage is not going to be that fine tuned outside. And some people are really motivated by getting those metrics and nailing the metrics that they set out, the details of their training that they set out to do or their coach wants them to do. And in my mind, when you're trying to be that close to 150, 155 watts, in my mind, I'm still pretty close if I'm 145 watts, and I'm still pretty close if I'm 160 watts. So my ranges are always going to be bigger, especially when I'm outside, to adapt to that varying terrain. And also, being a professional and an amateur, he can probably spend 5 hours training indoors, but because that's his job, he can probably still go outside at different parts of the day and get that sunshine and the breeze and everything else that I strive for when I'm outside. Whereas an amateur athlete who doesn't have that capability and that freedom to spend 5 hours outside and then spend 5 hours inside, it's just not the same.
There is that also the safety aspect of all of this.
Definitely.
A lot of us in the age range that most triathletes are, at least who've been doing it for a while, have families. You've got careers, you've got jobs. You can't really, it is a risk. Every time you and I and everyone listening gets on the bicycle, we take a risk. People texting and driving, people feeling like they own the road and there's very little shoulder. We take a risk every time we go out there, even if no one's out there, you hit some gravel. you lose your balance. You just lose focus for a few moments, and not so
Hmm.
much when you're running. But cycling is a risk, and I can see where that's a smart choice, and it's so hard if you have beautiful weather out. But if you can put your bike and your trainer out there on the patio or somewhere you can see and feel the air and take it in, that might be. But the safety part of it is so important, and I can
Yeah.
see why he can't take any risks. Even when he talked about running back with 10K to go when it was icy and he tripped and rolled his ankle. This is his livelihood. And
Yeah.
for us, there's also an element of livelihood, but also just, being active in our non triathlon life with our
Hmm.
family and doing things. So
Right.
I see the benefits of both. And it all depends on your why and what kind of results you're looking to get in the end.